for 60 minutes, an open letter to the Soviet Union. So you may remember from like 2 seconds ago that Russia left World War I early. This was because they were dealing with some major stuff of their own, you know, revolutions and whatnot. At the time, their leader was this guy called Tsar Nicholas II. See, the thing about Nicholas II was that he was not that good. He made some questionable decisions, like leaving Russia and putting his wife, Alexandra, who was probably being manipulated by this weird magical priest dude named Rasputin in charge. All this made him pretty unpopular, and in fact, he was so unpopular that in 1917 he was forced to abdicate. He also got assassinated later, but that's less important to the revolution and more important to the plots of books, musicals, and movies made about it. Yeah, the Romanov family is kind of a big deal, and a kind of a mess too. Anyways, after Nick abdicated, Russia established a provisional government until they could come up with something better. Before they could do that, though, this guy named Lenin showed up. Lenin led a group called the Bolsheviks in a revolution to overthrow the government. The Bolsheviks were basically made up of Russia's worker class. Anyways, they take over the government and put Lenin in charge, forming the USSR, or the Soviet Union. Now from here on, we have 3 major players, and also some other people. First off, we got Lenin. He's leading the USSR, with the help of a bunch of officials. 2 of these officials were these guys named Stalin and Trotsky. If you're ever bored, just read up about these guys before they got involved in politics, because they're pretty interesting. So anyways, after a while, Lenin starts to get weaker. Not like as a weaker ruler, but like physically weaker, like I'm going to die soon weaker. And everyone wants to know who's going to be leader when he does die. So let's see, Lenin is kind of buddies with Trotsky, and he's not a huge fan of Stalin. So Stalin knows he's going to have to pull some strings if he wants power. And that's exactly what he does. In the time leading up to Stalin's death, up to Lenin's death, Stalin isolated him, manipulated him, and even stole and edited some of the last documents he wrote. When Lenin finally died, Stalin was technically leader, but he wasn't done yet. He had to share his power, and some people saw him as just a figurehead. Spoiler alert, he's not a figurehead. To fix this, Stalin used some of his signature political manipulation to secure absolute power for himself, and to exile Trotsky to Mexico, where he was later assassinated by one of Stalin's guys with an ice pick. In Mexico, with an ice pick. Classic Russian assassin, am I right?
Concludes our short segment of 60 minutes. So, as the war went on, Germans continually used U-boats since one of their major enemies, Britain, was, well, an island. But, you see, Britain didn't like U-boats because it made Germany look cooler than them and also gave them the potential to sneak attack them. Now, since they were all gentlemanly, they agreed that sneak attacking the enemy wasn't fair in their friendly childhood game of hide and go die. So U-boats were outlawed. At first, Germany complied like a good little country, but near the end of the war, he was just like, screw this, Germany 1916, and then used U-boats, which was one of the causes of U.S. involvement in the war. Basically, there was the Lusitania, which the Germans sunk, and then there was the Zimmermann telegram, which was basically like Germany going behind U.S.'s back to Mexico, like, hey, if U.S. starts a war against us, you should totally just go kill them. And yeah, so that made the U.S. mad, they joined. So after Germany sunk another U.S. ship, the Sussex, the U.S. had Germany sign the Sussex Pledge, which Germany surprisingly backed out of in 1917. Shortly thereafter, the U.S. broke off ties. One of the final straws in U.S. involvement was the Zimmermann telegram, which was sent in January of 1917. It was a German telegram to Mexico that said if U.S. declared war on Germany, then Mexico should declare war on the U.S., and then they would give the Southwest United States back in exchange. Talk about talking behind someone's back. Germany was the gossip queen. Yes, queen. So, Woodrow Wilson, the current president, then declared war after Britain published the telegram on April 6, 1917. They, of course, wanted the U.S. in the war to outnumber Germany, and the U.S. saved their hides. U.S. entry also boosted the morale of the Allies. Then, in spring of 1918, the Germans launched their final offensive attack on the Allies before U.S. troops could get there. They'd be scurrying, gotta go fast. The attack was initially successful, but the Allies were able to defend against the 100 Days Offensive, which was, as the name implied, a 100-day period push on the offensive towards Germany, and they pushed Germany out of France. So, by the end, the U.S. finally had the decency to show up. I mean, they did need the time to mobilize their troops and all, but speed it up, baby. So, on November 11th at 11 a.m. in 1918, on the 11th day of the 11th month, blah, 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 Germans proposed an armistice. And we now celebrate this as Armistice Day. Cue applause, and the crowd went wild. Okay, so for those of you keeping score at home, Great Britain and Germany paid the most. Germany, Russia, and Austria-Hungary and France had the most casualties. The government fell apart in Russia, Ottoman Empire, Austria-Hungary, and Germany. Looks like a whopper for Germany, folks. Hopefully they fare better next time in World War, the sequel. We'll get to that later. So, as troops saw Europeans as less powerful, and nationalism and independence movements rose. So, now comes the diplomatic part in the war. I feel like that's an oxymoron. Stacy, doesn't that sound like an oxymoron?
Sure, I guess whatever floats your boat.
So, the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, all the major leaders met to decide how to end the war. Each country wanted something different. France wanted repayment from all the land destroyed and all the people killed, and wanted Alsace-Lorraine back. And Georges Clemenceau, I don't know how to pronounce French, wanted to weaken Germany so they could never attack again, which, I mean, doesn't happen. So, Britain wanted to punish Germany to get money back to the US because they borrowed a lot of money from the US, and their prime minister was David Lloyd George. The US wanted to recollect money and gain trade partners, and Woodrow Wilson wanted peace without victory with his 14 points. So the 14 points centered around openness for trade and alliances and encouraged independence of foreign nations. It was the war to end all wars, which really didn't happen, so it was like the war to end the wars that ended all wars. Yeah. So points 1 through 5 focused on eliminating causes of war and promoted free trade, disarmament, freedom of seas, adjusting colonial claims, and open diplomacy. 6 through 13 focused on self-determination for colonies and central powers to choose their own government. And 14 wanted to create a League of Nations to preserve peace. Great Britain, France, and Italy shot down all points but 14. So the war ended with 5 treaties. The Treaty of Versailles, which is the most important, had Clause 231, which is the war guilt clause, blaming Germany for the war, basically like when your mom makes you feel guilty, so you do whatever she says. Basically like that, but Germany was the kid, and the other countries just blamed everything on him, even though the other Central Powers were did stuff too, and they were just like, it's all Germany's fault, they started it. So this made Germany resent the Allies, and they also had an unstable government with no strong leaders, and the economy collapsed. And they didn't actually pay back their war debts until 2010, fun fact. So they lost Alsace-Lorraine and other European land and were forced to disarm most of their military and navy. They were also forced to make a republic called the Weimar Republic. So now for the effects. We're going to go fast, so listen closely. Treaties. Yay! The treaties of Trianon, split up Austria-Hungary, Treaty of Sèvres, decreed the Ottoman Empire, ended hostilities with the Allies, and this leads to Turkey's War of Independence, which was dissolved by 1923. We fix the world on a map now. Austria-Hungary dissolved into Austria, Hungary, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia. But one half of these countries don't exist now anyway, so maybe we don't need to fix the world. And the Ottoman Empire turned into modern-day Turkey, and there was also the Mandate System and Balfour Declaration. Everyone is upset, yay! Japan wanted all the German Pacific colonies, but only got a few. Italy wanted more Austrian territory than it received, being helped by the Allies. So Vittorio Orlando, the Prime Minister, walked out by June 1919 of the conference. And for the Middle East, Britain promised them self-determination, but they only got the Mandate System. Wow, this was just really depressing for everyone. Woo! The U.S. never signed the Treaty of Versailles or joined the League of Nations because the Senate did not want the U.S. obligation to fight in future wars, which was pretty smart, actually. They messed up Germany so much that their government and economy collapsed, leading to many angry citizens and very noticeably an angry, rejected artist with a mustache. But that's a story for another time. That's all for tonight on Fox 12 News. Tune in tomorrow for some insight on the greater aftermath of World War I. And later for World War, the sequel.
Cut! That was terrible. The lighting was wrong. The humor was subpar. I want you to do it all over. Stat!
Stacy, we're live.
Hi. Wait, why is Madison the teleprompter?